welcome to Quick Take. I'm your host, Susie Tomanchuk, along with my co-host, James Capps. How are you, James?
I'm super good. Super
Me too.
fine.
Super
Super
fine.
great.
All right. So one of my favorite topics to talk about, because this goes over to negotiation too. So I love this topic is no and clarity about the ask. And
Oh my gosh, yeah.
it really occurred to me this week. I work with a senior executive and she has some feedback she needs to give to the team about how they need to look at the business case. And she's like, I keep telling them and they don't hear me. And so I went to her staff meeting because I was like, I want to hear what she's saying. Like, why is there such this chasm of what I'm saying and what I'm hearing? And so I went to her staff meeting and I was waiting for her to articulate exactly what I thought she should say. And she didn't even come close.
And you knew what she was going to tell them and you still didn't hear it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was so interesting. So and I understand it because I remember as an executive, I remember having to give tough information to somebody or telling somebody, you know what, you better get,
Perform
better.
in a certain way.
Yeah, performance. Yeah. Thank you. I was going to use a cuss word and you know me and cuss words. We don't go along. But being really clear about what the expectations are. We believe we're saying one thing and we're not sometimes because we have a relationship with these words and no is one of them.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating word. And I think that we have been certainly programmed as children to respond to no in a certain way. I think we are programmed as a receiver of that word differently than we are a transmitter of that word. I think we hear it in a different way, much differently than we say it. I think it's easier for us to hear, harder for us to say. And I think that's one of, there are very few words, and maybe yes is a similar word, but it's strange that it's not as simple as it appears.
I think it's also really interesting to look at what we believe no is and what no is actually.
Oh, interesting.
We think of no as somebody's going to go, no, you can't have this.
Right,
no.
Right.
And it's always disguised by, I understand, but we don't have the budget for that right now.
Right.
And it's not this, you expect that, okay, I heard a no, now I'm going to move through it on that side. And the other side of it is we aren't that clear about exactly what we mean.
Yeah. And I suspect if you speak to any executive, that they would say that they have an absolute ability to say no with clarity and crispness.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. You witnessed it in person, that it is so rare that the answer is no without a tremendous amount of caveat and fluff and data that goes along with it. And I think as an executive, we should be able to say no in lots of different ways and use that as a muscle that we should be building and growing. And I think, that, the three areas that I'll talk about are just unique ways to say no and areas that you can say no. That gives you more of a license to be better at saying it.
All right. Well, tell us the first one.
Well, I think the first one is really learning to say no about your time and identifying those time sucks, identifying those areas that you need to delegate. I think that there's so many great stories about whether it's Elon Musk or even, Sheryl Sandberg was really well. She spoke clearly about it in her book about how she champions the ability to delegate so much work to her high performing teams. Elon is known historically to delegate so much of the engineering stuff to his teams. And so really learning to say no to stuff that you can do, but shouldn't do. And I think that's something that executives really need to embrace better.
Yeah, I need to double click here because I talk to people about delegation all the time. And I talk about it as delegation to develop.
Yeah.
So it's not just taking something off of our plate. It's thinking about how is that going to build trust with the other person? How is that going to give them experience that's going to give them some muscles that they have to move through? And you also talked about sometimes it's easy for us to do, and that fills our ego because
Yes.
we feel this sense of accomplishment to get something done. And so we have to be aware of that, because it's not about us when we're leaders. It's really about the team.
Right. I'm coaching a CEO right now who she is has struggled with her social media team, and they're not being creative, they're not being innovative, they're not being responsive. And I finally asked her how involved she was in. She told me she was very involved. I said, "How many of the posts do you edit or write yourself?" She goes, "Almost all of them." I said, "Well, then you're not doing any. You're not saying no. You are the problem." And so that was a very fascinating conversation, because she felt, as we talked about, that she had said no. She's not doing the social media posts, yet she was. And I think that identifying as a leader, identifying those areas that you can say no to and delegate, I think is absolutely critical.
So I want to just throw out a technique. I wonder if in our heads we need to say, should I be doing this? Yes or no? And then take action. Because I also think we don't take the time to identify. We just jump in and do it. That feels comfortable to her. She never really thought about it.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that's really my second piece of advice when it comes to these types of things, is as a concept I like to call the power pause. There was a great guy that you and I worked with at Comcast, and his name was Kevin. I won't mention his last name, but he was one of the most intelligent engineers that I'd ever worked with. Very smart man. And I learned the power pause from him, because he would start a sentence by saying almost every time, and then he would pause. But I'll tell you what, when Kevin said, the room got quiet. And that pause gave him not only the opportunity to think through the moment, but also gave him the command of the room. And I think that power pause that Kevin so well embraced is an opportunity or a moment that allows you to determine whether you should do something or not.
Yeah.
This is the window where you can begin to think about saying no. So many times we are thrown with decision making and thrown with quick responses, but that power pause really gives you the moment to think through. I think that actually Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, is known, and I've read many articles about his thoughtful listening and slow responsiveness. Or not responsiveness, slow response to the conversations, where he is known for active listening and giving significant thought to his responses. And I think he uses that power pause to ensure that he is acknowledging or admitting or stepping into what he should be and saying no to what he shouldn't.
Yeah.
A lot of our responses as leaders and as people who like to solve problems, a lot of those responses are based on our desire to solve and be the problem solver. And I think having a power pause there gives you strength to say no.
So I have a great example. Last week I was moderating a panel of BRG leaders that were talking about advocating for yourself and finding a voice in these moments and having the courage to do it. And I love that topic so much, and I've read a lot of research around it, but I decided not to be a voice in the conversation because it wasn't my place to be. It was for theirs. But it was hard. I had to really practice the power of the pause, to ask them a question and not jump in to reiterate what they said, just to acknowledge it and allow their voice to stand alone. I think as leaders, we sometimes get that energy of wanting to show that we know. And so I love that power pause to, even in the moment, allow yourself not to be the center of attention.
Yeah. I think it's just it's part of our nuance of being both the leader and the follower. The servant leadership approach, and I think that it's part of our growth as executives to not be the smartest person in the room, not to solve every problem. Yeah,
I love the power of the pause because it just creates that space to make that choice about what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah, and I think that the final one is really, it's key for us to be, and I think we started the conversation with this, is crisp in the no, right? You've got to say, no, that is not the best use of my time, my capacity, my resources, and you've got to say the word no, right?
Yep.
And I think that there is a nuance between saying no, I'm more important than that, and no, that should be done by somebody else. You want to make sure that you're communicating in a positive way, but ultimately, you've got to use the word no in the conversation for your time. And things that are a little softer tend to be confusing, as you said at the top of the show. If you said, for example, I don't know that I'll have time for that. I don't know that that's really something I can do right now. I'm a little underwater with his acquisition. Those are 3 ways of saying no, and I never said that. I never said no, and that's not effective. If your team wants to understand that there are boundaries, and you want your team to understand there are boundaries, you've got to be crisp in that word, and you've got to practice it.
I think that's so difficult to do. And it's in that pause and making that choice. Is this a yes or is this a no, so that you can say it? And, the research shows that we have a hard time saying no. It's not easy for us to do. So practicing that, even, I think about my girls, it's really hard for me to say no. I catch myself all the time trying to figure out how I can say yes. And sometimes they get mad at me sometimes. So saying the word more and being courageous around that, I think, is the practice here.
Yeah, a great method that I've seen. I work with another leader who starts off by saying something like, I want to say no to that. And that is it's a great way of saying no and making you feel okay about it, making them feel a way about it. You're still saying no, and it allows you to almost articulate or think that out loud in a way that may be more comfortable to you.
Yeah.
Right. Rather than just knee jerk, like your parents saying, no, you do not get ice cream before dinner. It's like, I want to say no to that. And let's work out why that is. Yeah. And then when you land on it as, that's just going to be a no. That's collaborative. They understand your thought process. And that's just a much healthier way to handle it. And I love that, working on that muscle of learning to say no in a way that works for you.
Yeah. I love that too, because you're signaling to the other person, you're almost getting them ready for the no.
Yeah.
And yourself too, because you're framing it that this is where I'm going.
Right.
So I'm going to have to use that. I'm going to need some advice here, because I know it's not an easy thing for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to really think about that.
That's a good one. Yeah.
All right. So what are the 3?
So first and foremost, identify those areas, like actively determine where you should be saying no, delegate, push off the work, walk the walk. Second one is work on this power pause. Use that before you commit. Make sure you're not saying yes to things you shouldn't be, and start getting comfortable with saying no more often. And then, communicate that no much more clearly. Find ways to say that, to introduce it into the conversation, perhaps, so you're more comfortable saying it. But if you aren't clearly saying no, then you're probably not being clear to your team.
Wow. Such good advice. Thanks, James.
Thank you.